Welcome to the Liberty Without Compromise live stream broadcast, the only politically conservative, local, liberty-minded program in Kootenai County, where we spend our time, invest our time exposing the political power players, politicians, and lots of social and media influencers. We're your hosts, Dan and Dawna Wilson. I'm here to screen your questions and comments. We will be taking your phone calls tonight. That number's 208-366-4671. The rules of engagement are you call, I answer your phone, you hang on the line until we bring you up into the program. We'll have some other technical rules for you as well on how to use your phone so that we get the best audio experience possible. For those of you who aren't into the phone call situation, you can participate throughout the program by putting those comments right into the comment section on whichever platform you're joining us tonight. And if you're watching live, make sure to click that share button right now. Share that to your page or profile so that we can have as many of us joining in on this live conversation as possible. And for those of you listening back on our podcast, remember to join us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And then always you can listen and subscribe wherever you get your shows. A reminder, the opinions expressed are ours only, not necessarily that of our advertisers, sponsors, or affiliates. And tonight, that midday square link, this delicious treat, is going to be right there in the comments section. Help support this program. Get 15% off by clicking that link right there in the comments. And now here's your host, Dan Wilson.
Good evening. I don't know about you, but it is April 16th, the day after the hardest day of the entire year. You know what day that is?
Oh, yes.
Tax day.
Yeah, what I was seeing yesterday on X was, so how many of you didn't file your taxes? I want to know. Mm-hmm. Like how many really stood their ground and didn't file?
Well, we filed them. We paid our taxes, our estimated taxes, and our additional Idaho taxes.
Are you implying that you always pay your taxes?
Pay my taxes forward, yeah. State of Idaho, I wish they would get rid of this unfair income tax and go to something that's a little more equitable. But anyway, thank you for joining us tonight, episode 18, Setting the Record Straight. It's going to be a rapid fire conversation. And you know what? We are not always talking about the same things week after week after the week. That's one of the things that folks love about this show. But one thing that we do talk about every single week, and that is liberty without compromise. And as Dawna alluded to earlier, we have a lot of opinions, and they're not necessarily always the people that we associate with their opinions, nor are their opinions our opinions. Our opinions are our own. Boy, that is a tongue twister.
Yeah, and you found that that's led to some great interactions, exchanges, and civil conversations because you can sit down with somebody over a cup of coffee and agree on a lot of things that I would say are foundational type elements, but it doesn't mean that there's agreement on every single point or how that person has operated in every single way throughout their life.
We have the liberty in this country to pursue those things that we want to do to make our lives better. It's one of the three pillars of our freedom here in America: life, liberty, and property. And yes, we are uncompromising when it comes to liberty. Just the other day, I caught the end of Braveheart. I love that movie for so many reasons. And I'm certain many of you do too. And I love that phrase, they died and lived like warrior poets. And you know, if you think about that analogy, warrior poets, you don't always think of those in the same category. How can a man be able to wield a sword and kill an enemy and wage war and at the same time also be a poet? We think of those as being incompatible, but really, every one of us, men out there and women, you should be able to not only fight for what you believe in, but you should also be into the arts, into things that broaden your entire horizon, who you are, what your experiences are. And I'm not saying experiment in drugs and doing certain things like that, but in other words, don't get just caught up in your own little bubble. If you were raised a certain way and you only put the toilet paper facing one way on the roll, you know?
Yeah.
Try other ways out.
You got to be open to learning because we all know what the right way is to put the toilet paper on the dispenser.
Dispenser.
Before we go further, I do want to remind you that we have a a contest entry going on right now for this premium Liberty Without Compromise snapback trucker hat that is only available through entry into the contest, not currently available on our store. So I'm just going to put this screen up, share the screen here so that you can get a little bit better look at that hat. And then I'm going to show you. You just click this button here on the home page for an entry to win, which is through the form right here. And then there are some additional steps you can follow shown here underneath the form.
Is it like 3 or 4 clicks
additional
just
entries.
to enter?
It's one click from the home page. You do actually have to go to libertywithoutcompromise.com.
Is there a pop-up?
There's no pop-up. We have no pop-ups on that website. Yeah.
Good.
You're the anti-pop-up. You should probably become a legislator and make some kind of law about that.
I would immediately enact a law that if you put up a pop-up of any sort on your website, you're immediately suspended from the internet for a minimum of 30 days.
So you would include consequences.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because it doesn't do any good to have a law, if there's no penalties.
Yeah.
Right?
Billy Painter wanted to know if we're taking phone calls tonight. Yes, we are. We'll push that back for just a little bit later in the program.
And we tested the phones. They are working.
I mean, what does that really mean? You know, we tested them. No, we should be all good. We'll let you know again those rules on the phone. Well, quickly, if you do call in, I'll receive that call, put you on hold, just hang tight for a minute till we bring you up into the program. It'll be most helpful on your phone. Speak directly into the phone. No speakerphone, no earbuds, no AirPods, those type of devices, because we found that creates a little bit of a choppy situation. But we have tested it and are able to get clean audio when you're speaking directly into the phone. So those are the rules. We'll address it again later too. Now, over the last year and a half, and it continues to this day, today, in fact, you've been accused of being everything from a no-name Republican with no political or professional experience, failure in your personal life, a Democrat, a rhino, a groiper, a white supremacist, rumors that you've been booted from the Christian Bible-believing church.
Well, the Catholic Church.
Oh, you were booted from Catholic.
Well, the power player pastor that's on 95 that has the big Israeli flag.
Oh, so yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're booted. Oh, you've been accused of being...
He'd heard a rumor
accused of
that in less than 18 months, I had joined the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And then was excommunicated.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. You've been accused of running a smear campaign with no vision, no plan for the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. You've exposed corruption surrounding Bob Norris and his administration, but you've been accused of having no proof for any of that. Accused of being angry, combative, unresponsive to questions, arrogant. Accused of being funded by somebody or someone else, some other organization, because who in their right mind just wakes up one day and decides to run for sheriff? You've been accused of attacking churches and pastors. Also that you are not a real cowboy and your T-shirts are too tight. Did I leave anything out?
Well, Lucky doesn't think my T-shirts are big enough yet.
Yeah.
Size
so
medium.
I don't know if I left anything out.
Size
of that.
medium, yeah.
Okay.
Well, how about not a real cop?
Oh.
Not a real cop.
Yeah, no, that was, kind of like balled up into the no experience, but that's an important one.
Not a real cop. I've been called an adulterer.
Yes.
A child abuser.
Yeah.
An SOB. An unfriendly neighbor. Yeah. So
all of those things we're going to rapid fire go through tonight. If someone comes into your comment section and picks a fight, if you respond, you're mean, angry, and arrogant. If you don't respond, you avoid questions. You're elusive. They start to hit below the belt in the comment section, so they get blocked. It's your right to do that. Well, now Wilson doesn't believe in free speech. So tonight we are addressing all of these things, again, without holding back. Probably going to take some twists and turns. It's going to be a bit nonlinear, but it all is a part of a bigger picture in Kootenai County politics. This is what happens when a guy does decide one day to run for office because he sees a need. He has a vision, but with no professional political experience, plenty of life, business, and law enforcement experience to bring to the office of the sheriff. Well, in the political arena in Kootenai County, the arsenal being used against a singular man is vast and twisted, with tentacles reaching into just about everything, is what we've discovered. Now, if there are things that we address as this conversation unfolds that require illustration, maybe a video, screenshot, or other evidence, we're going to follow up with those things that can be cross-referenced. Those will be shared and made available on our website at libertywithoutcompromise.com. So one of the things going down that I think requires some attention today, because this is a hot topic of today, but we have got a new Idaho flag law, which from the sounds of it is really more just of a suggestion. The legislators and their mouthpieces in media and in social circles are using this as fuel or for clicks, for conversation online to create heated debates. One of the things you had talked about is it kind of seems there's the perspective of they know what they're doing, they're poking the bear, they're getting a reaction, and both sides currently seem to be using that to their advantage.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your perspective on that.
Well, the bill that you're talking about that was just signed into law, and I use that term loosely, is for those that aren't in Idaho, aren't following this, that greatly restricts the ability of any government office, state, local, county, so on and so forth, from displaying any flag that's not an official flag, like military, POW, state flag, the American flag, things that are of that official government business, if you will. And so in the city of Boise, the mayor has been flying for, I believe, close to 10 years, a pride flag there at City Hall, Boise City Hall there. And so this law went into effect, and immediately within a short time, we were told that that flag was taken down, only to go up the next day with a newer flag. And people were extremely upset, going, how dare the mayor violate this law, and there's going to be consequences. Except the small little problem. Our legislators wrote a law, and they actually amended an existing code in Idaho statute, and they didn't assign any penalties for violation of said law. None. Zilch. Zero. So there are no consequences to flipping the bird to the state of Idaho and the citizens and putting up a flag of your choice. Now, I think this is interesting because people, by and large, the majority in Idaho do not want a pride flag. And equally, I don't think they would want a stars and bar, the Confederate flag, flown around, right? And government business should be specifically about business in the state, not promoting any other special interest group. So the question I have, when you have all of these conservatives hand-wringing, it's the greatest travesty. Look at what is happening right now. We have a mayor that is above the law, that is defying the law. Well, do we? Or do we have
have the sheriff go in and arrest her?
Or do we have a mayor that's potentially smarter than the legislators? Now, think about this, folks. We know that in this state, there is a cultural battle being waged. In fact, we were told over and over and over again how conservative the state legislators are, especially from northern Idaho, and that they're going to force morality back in, and they're going to make certain that we are free from the communists, from the degenerates. You know that those that are opposed to that are equally going to say, well, these legislators are fascists, they're Nazis, they're Hitlers, and we don't ascribe to that, we're not going to obey it. You know that they're not going to comply unless they're compelled to have to do so. So all these professional lawmakers, The ones that have been patting themselves on the back for doing cool things like passing ivermectin over the counter and some medical freedom things. How could they be this dumb to write legislation that you know is going to be controversial, that you know is going to spur on emotions from people that are going to act upon those emotions, and you think so strongly that you're going to put something into law, but you don't put any kind of penalties for disregarding said law? No misdemeanor, no felony, no monetary. Did you do it because you guys just kind of overlook that, even though it goes through committees and has hearings? Or did you do it on purpose because maybe you're not solid on your ability as a state legislature to actually make this a law, because maybe it potentially comes into First Amendment territory? I'm not an expert in that part of case law, so I don't know. But all of my friends that are absolutely out of their minds, pissed off, people are so upset that a mayor is vehemently disobeying what the legislature and the consent of the people said. Okay. Well, the question you should be asking, which, by the way, be pissed off about that. Fully good. I'm not happy at all. I don't want a pride flag flying from any building. I don't want a heterosexual flag, if there is one, flying from any kind of government building. I don't want a Presbyterian flag. I don't want a Mormon flag. I don't want a Catholic flag. You should be upset with your legislature for doing what they just did to you. And you should be asking that question rather than getting spun up over this Boise mayor who is grandstanding and is trying to press her issue in the point. Now it's up for the good people in Boise to hold that individual accountable. But the rest of the state, instead of looking at the broader picture, you're just focused on this one little offense here. Don't misunderstand me. It's not right. But you guys are missing the bigger picture. And it blows my mind that we continually hear the argument over and over and over again that you have to have competent people, experienced people in these positions. You got to have people that have the experience to know how to navigate through these waters and to not put the people at any kind of exposure from liability.
Mm-hmm.
Ask that question.
And that is something that all the way through today, for the last year and a half, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, all the way through today is something that you continue to get heat for. An inexperienced candidate going up against what you've labeled a massively failing bureaucrat named Sheriff Bob Norris.
Mm-hmm.
And there's proof of that.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back to the beginning, and I know we're switching gears here. That's okay. That's what this program is about tonight. Talk to me about who infiltrated, because one of the accusations is it just was a negative smear campaign that you ran. We're going to get to that in a bit. Who infiltrated your campaign out of the gate?
Do we say infiltrated or do we say attacked out of the gate? Probably. Okay. I would use attacked out of the gate.
Infiltrate might come across as more subversive, where attack is showed up outright. And so who is that person or some of those people?
Well, it's DC Bruce Mattare.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Mattare, County Commissioner and Special Deputy. And the reason why I say that is if these people truly believed in their Republican principles, then they would have let me have my say. They would have listened to everything, but they wouldn't have come there with an agenda to try to kill the baby in the cradle, so to speak.
And then this was at your announcement.
Yeah, I'd never had, other than one conversation with Bruce Mattare when he was running for county commissioner, which I then used that conversation after Bruce came in and started his attack, if you will, his soft attack. But Yeah, I mean, this is the way these so-called local GOP conservative, God-fearing people that, just want what's good and God and apple pie. Bruce Mattare, without having any kind of conversation with the dude whatsoever, came to my first event in an attempt to try to smear me out of the shoots. Luckily, we got it on camera, but he had heard about my idea for bringing in a deputy reserve program. He came to challenge me immediately and to try to embarrass me. And it didn't go too well for him, did it?
It didn't.
But this is continually how this group operates up here. This is really what they do.
There were then consecutive events. So one of those was the pachyderms where you were invited to speak, which is a Kootenai County Republican Central Committee, like a
subgroup, maybe.
Subgroup.
I don't know if they're officially
they're probably
tied.
unofficial. A lot of the same people who are in the KCRCC attend these groups.
Mm-hmm.
So you were invited to speak as a candidate, which seemed like a reasonable and honorable gesture.
Well, Bev Gwinnett, who's the darling of the KCRCC, she is part of the KCRCC. She called me sometime in January, early January, and set me up for both the pachyderms, which was a Friday morning, and then the following, I want to say Wednesday or Friday in the afternoon for the Reagan Republicans. So she booked me for both of those.
What does it say to you when you have people, you're invited to an event with nothing, really no way to be prepared or to know what to expect? Again, a guy who's not in professional politics, doesn't run in those circles, not rubbing elbows with these people to gain clout.
Yeah.
What does it say to you about the people who came in to ambush that situation? What does that say about these so-called conservatives or members of the KCRCC or even some elected officials that showed up at that event knowing full well they're going to catch you unexpected and unaware? It was their prime opportunity to do it, because at any point after that, if you're a quick study, you're going to know, okay, I'm going to be better prepared. But they didn't. Yeah. They did it right out of the gate. Who were some of the people that showed up to that event, and how did that unfold?
Well, you had KCRCC vetting members, Terry Seymour, Nina Beasley. There were two others. I forget the lady's name, an elderly lady. But they were there. In fact, I was tipped off through some post on Erin and Lucky Barnard's the Kootenai Spectator Telegram page.
KC Spectator.
The KC Spectator. That they were going to come, Nina and Terry were going to come to ambush me.
Okay.
Because they were convinced that I was pro smut for kids in the school, and school-age children, rather, minors in the library. And so, Bruce, who Terry loves, we've heard her glowingly talk about Bruce before, and Nina, all part of the KCRCC. We had them even during the vetting time frame talking up Bob, my opponent, and how great he is and how horrible I am, while they're supposed to be sitting on the vetting committee. What does that say? It should scare the hell out of anybody who thinks that you're going to be a Republican and you're going to run on your principles and your ideas and you're going to be given a fair shake. Make no mistake, Brent Reagan and the KCRCC and their political arm are kingmakers in Kootenai County right now. Because if they like you and you're in, you're the recipient, along with all the other candidates, of their, I've been told, $80,000 mailer that goes out at the primary and at the general election for who their recommended candidate is.
Well, okay.
And you're not going to compete with that. If KCRCC says, look, you're not our guy, we don't like you, just because, not that you're not qualified, not that you're a good candidate, but we don't like you because we've been told that we shouldn't like you.
Right. So they have that kind of financial arsenal, and they pull in who they know they want to push forward, endorse, and back. Yeah. Why isn't that enough? What is the purpose of coming out? Because again, I want to get back to this pachyderm event and talk a little bit of specifics. What what unfolded? I mean, again, not a long drawn out story, but what are some of the highlights of what unfolded at that event that was so egregious?
You had Bruce Mattare again showing up, and I don't know which camera I'm on. I'm not on my laptop.
We're in the wide shot right now. Yep.
Bruce Mattare came into this event with an actual police incident report from 2012 that he obtained. We found out later through my ex-wife, who had hooked up with him and Bob, and I use that loosely, a partial story in an attempt to smear me and do hey, do you beat your wife, or are you still beating your wife? You know, those kind of questions where whatever way you answer, you're going to appear guilty. And the question was, have you ever lied to law enforcement?
Yeah.
Because he was going to once again smear me instead of letting me talk. He's a damn representative at this point.
Mm-hmm.
He has a conflict of interest because
he's
already tied with Bob Norris, right, a special deputy. And you have this guy coming to an event, again, whipping up a bunch of people who are very fond of Bruce, don't know me, and he's attempting to be that change agent and shape how that event goes, trying to embarrass me, trying to imply that I'm a liar, that I've got a criminal background, which none of that is true. And that is just one of the scoundrels that came out. The other scoundrel was Brent Surplus. And Brent Surplus was Bruce Mattare's pick. He came out and publicly stated it for county commissioner against Leslie Duncan. And after that event, Brent came up to me and he started telling me,
Brett Surplus.
Brett Surplus came up to me and he says, you really should drop out of the race. Nobody knows who you are. And, not like me. I'm well known, but it was the same thing. Gotcha questions. There wasn't any kind of civility in any of these people. You want to talk about the rudeness of the Democrats at your events? Let me tell you, at least if you have an enemy that you know where they're coming from, you can have some kind of a fair fight. But when it's hidden by the people that should be there to be respectful, to hear your ideas and listen to what your platform is, and instead of doing that, you immediately engage in smear campaigns. And the girl that was running that, I forget her name.
Yeah, I can see her face, but I don't remember.
The moderator, she never one time stepped in.
Right.
So it was being, at that time, they thought fed to the wolves, but I don't think they were successful by any stretch. I learned a lot from that event, but these are the people that we continually see in controversies all over with the current KCRCC events. Things that are always going sideways. Terry Seymour violently ripping a microphone out of Coeur d'Alene City Councilman Dan Gookin's hands. And then later on joking about it and having others that are part of KCRCC leadership joking about it. Never one time did we see them coming out and say, hey, unacceptable. We as Republicans do better. So what I'm saying is that you have a giant bully organization that is running their local GOP. And they are trying to force down their values on anybody else and everybody else that they can, because they have the power right now. They have the financial backing. And as somebody who has been a lifelong Republican that was forced to run as an independent during the campaign, yeah, I got 20-something% of the vote. Along the lines of what the independents were. Wasn't going to compete against the big Reagan-controlled KCRCC.
And ask yourself again, why was it not enough if they've got the war chest that they do and they can endorse and promote the candidates that they want with, in this county, what might as well be a limitless supply of influence and money? Why try to take you down? Why do that?
They were all, every one of them were working in cooperation. Same talking points.
Yes.
The same feigned, we gave him a chance and he just lied. No, you didn't. You didn't. For those of you like Shelley Kroll, that I gave you an hour of my time and answered every one of your questions to its fullest extent, which is still captured on video, lest anybody claim that I'm lying. In fact, you were annoying so many people because you were taking up so much of the time asking questions that people finally commented and said, you need to let other people talk. But Shelley finds me to be untruthful. And Shelley, to this day, you have never once produced one bit of evidence of where I lied or misled anybody.
In a recent podcast, local podcast hosted by local real estate agents, there was an interview of Bob Norris and Bruce Mattare, the dynamic duo. One of the hosts of that local podcast engaged in the conversation with them when their conversation flipped to, okay, you were reelected. It was a landslide victory. They kind of got their kicks and jollies by chiding about Norris not having any real competitors. And then that slid into this, what you've heard, again, year and a half through today, that you ran nothing but a smear campaign. So if you had something to say to the host of that podcast that wanted to drive that home and make that point as he was yucking it up. And I understand why local realtors are it puts them in a very good position to bring elected officials and the county sheriff onto their program.
They bragged about bringing people to Kootenai County, getting sales, because they were using local law enforcement in order to entice people. Hey, this is a great place to come to because not only of our law enforcement, but as law enforcement professionals looking to relocate. So yeah, they are using the sheriff's office, in my opinion, as part of a sales gimmick.
So one of the I'll come back to my original question, but one of the golden nuggets in that particular podcast was Bruce Mattare talking about how people make a community what it is. And he gave an illustration.
People should go back and listen to it because it's truly revealing. Bruce said the quiet part out loud.
Okay.
Folks, Bruce Mattare, who's not from Kootenai County, he came from Washington, D.C. area in about 2013-ish, was finally saying the quiet part out loud. This community is changing because all the people coming from California and from all of the other states, which again, I'm not opposed to people coming from other states. That is American. But he said that they're bringing the culture and they're changing that culture, and the culture in Kootenai County is changing based on the people that are bringing with them. And Kootenai County is great, but if this community right now were told to go to Maryland, to Baltimore, then they would leave Kootenai County and go to Baltimore because it's all about the culture and the people that are here, not necessarily the geography. That's at least the way I took it.
And that was the illustration that he used. Yeah, very, very colorful.
Your county commissioner that continually talks about responsible growth, along with Bob Norris, one of the three pillars that Bob Norris ran on was responsible growth. I call it smart growth because he's into the smart cities and the LPRs and the surveillance state.
That's what the evidence suggests.
So, Bruce is saying it. And I think that he forgets sometimes who his audience is. But look, there are people that live here that don't want the culture to change. We welcome people to come in here, but adopt our culture, adopt who we are. Don't bring your crap from your other states that you're fleeing and bring them into Kootenai County.
Back to now the host of that podcast, when they got into their boy talk and really he had to get his digs in by saying, my advice to him, without naming names, but my advice to Wilson would be run on your own merit. The last thing you want to do is run a smear campaign, and they want to associate your supposed smear campaign with the loss of that election. What would you have to say to that host about the kind of campaign that you ran? One, did you set out to run a smear? And we've already highlighted some of that with the attacks that happened out of the gate. You still, despite that, pivoted and had numerous town halls that were phenomenally inspiring, that really only had to compare a failing candidate when those specific questions were asked, What are the problems? What are you going to do differently? You were very upfront and forward about those questions. What would you have to say to that host who's accusing you of doing nothing but running a smear campaign, and you've got Norris and Mattare sitting there to confirm that they're all yucking it up?
Well, I would say you, as a retired California law enforcement officer, you know how the game's played. So you're not somebody that comes into this argument not being part of the system. And you left that system and you came here. You understand how a sheriff works. And for you, of all people, and when you interviewed me, I thought you were fair and balanced, although you did bring a list of questions that all your cop friends were dying to ask me, the Deputy Sheriff's Association, as I recall. Your dig was unwarranted. What do you mean running a negative campaign, a smear campaign? Where were you at my over 24 town halls and meet and greets where I talked about all my ideas? In fact, when I came out at my opening kickoff, which is still on video, when I went to my town halls and to the hosted town halls like North Idaho Freedom Fighters, and I talked to you about things like my Citizens Posse, when I talked about my Deputy Reserve Program, when I talked about auditing the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office, when I talked to you about the importance of preparing this community for any kind of a man-made or natural event that were to occur, when I talked to you about human trafficking, and I gave my idea for stopping the flow of illegal invaders into this country, where I actually went down to the border firsthand and caught on our own video equipment those hundreds of military-aged males there at the Sasabee Crossing, east of there near Nogales. When we brought that back and told people what was going on, and I said, you have to go after the NGOs. And when Bob Norris continually lied and said that I was attempting to violate civil rights of citizens and that I was going to make illegal arrests, completely lying, completely glossing over the fact that the inexperienced guy that had absolutely zero ability to articulate anything more than a smear campaign was saying, go after the NGOs on numerous, dozens of times publicly. Go after the NGOs. And you know what's funny now? Now that Trump's in at a national level, what are they talking about? Going after the NGOs. And folks, do you realize that Paul Truett was emailing Bob Norris right before the town hall meeting? I have the emails in my possession. And he was emailing a resolution that it looks like that was being sponsored and adopted by not only the KCRCC, but state legislators were getting in on it, which was legislation that they were going to go after NGOs subverting Idaho laws. So I don't know, Seth, when you want to talk about whether or not, I have any substance or if I'm just going to smear, did you actually get off your ass and look at anything that I actually had to say? Or are you just covering because, you were retired California law enforcement and you believe that the only people worthy of holding the position, the elected position where no previous law enforcement experience is even required? Apparently you don't realize that, but you're going to promote only those that come from the country that you fled.
You touched on the posse, the audit of the sheriff's office that has never been audited.
Doge before Doge was Doge.
A forensic audit. Once again, Wilson predicting the direction that a country might go if you have people elected into power that are going to do something to combat the corruption, which is what we're hoping is happening now under the current administration. You had planned to give a portion of your salary back for programs that you intended to implement.
30% of my salary I was going to donate back to the volunteer service division that I was going to form for the Citizens Posse and for the Reserve Deputy Program. I was made fun of, Why aren't you going to take your full salary? That's not 30% isn't going to cover anything. Well, it is a signal of saying a man with integrity that truly believes in something is going to do this. This was the proactive, plan that I had in place. And even stating that I will only serve 2 terms and I will self-moderate term limits to myself.
Mm-hmm. Fixing some of these things you cannot discuss without having to recognize there are failures of the current administration for Kootenai County under Sheriff Bob Norris's leadership. So yes, we'll give you that. Some of these things you cannot even talk about with your plans to implement upon election without recognizing the problem.
They
first.
Brought back in Kamala Harris and saying, Kamala was running just on Trump and what he had done and blah, 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 blah. You guys are intellectually dishonest because Trump, if you go back to any of his rallies, how often did Trump specifically mention the failed policies of Joe Biden, the stolen election? Give me a break. I am so sick and tired of local Republicans idolizing national figures and holding a standard for them. And then locally, you're not even the same when it comes to the standards that you have for your own local candidates.
So one of those was fixing, again, can't have the solution until you present what the problem is and your intentions to correct it. Yeah. You had a limit in the first, I believe, 60 to 90 days of fixing the 911 issue.
We did indeed.
Is or has been a known problem.
Yeah, because they had to go back and ask for $120,000 in retention bonuses back right before the election.
So not only are you running a campaign, making appearances, doing all of those things, but also doing the internal investigations necessary to understand prior to taking office what those problems, what you're going to, the direction you're going to take first. And taking all of the time to do that. That's not pie in the sky ideas. These are based on research and information. So 911 issues, also hiring issues and jail staffing issues, all known problems.
Helicopter.
The helicopter program that was a complete mess. So again, some of them are bigger picture ideals. Some of those things
you hypocrites. Again, tonight is going to be a night of preventing. You hypocrites. Every last one of you right now that is clapping your hands at Elon Musk and Trump because they're businessmen and they're cleaning up government and they have an eye for rooting out corruption. And you're the exact same ones that nonstop and continually to this day talk about no experience. Wilson has 0 experience. And yet Dan Wilson was able to come in and in a short amount of time provide all the details in writing as to why the helicopter program, this volunteer helicopter program, the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office is running with a private entity, is full of risk and liability. You have a guy that spent 30 years his last several years as a lieutenant, talking about all of his administrative experience, and he's not even smart enough to be able to figure out that his helicopter is a flying liability. Took a businessman to come in and find that out. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the problems with, the issues with the $200,000 donation that the tribe gave. And then right after that, Bob Norris, at the request of the tribe, allowed them to be cross-deputized and given over to be primary law enforcement for both tribal and non-tribal members on tribal lands, where Kootenai County citizens, non-tribal members, are paying taxes.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to bring up our caller. We want to make sure this is conducive to the discussion at hand, so we'll make that judgment call. You're on the air here with Dan Wilson.
Hey, Billy, what's going on?
Okay, we're going to drop that because I'm not sure what that was. So legitimate phone call. You can try giving us a call back. That was a choppy signal. Doing some housekeeping today in this rapid fire episode. I want to remind you, for those of you who joined us later in the program, be sure to share this as we are live so more can join in on the discussion. One thing I want to hit, we've got a viewer joining us on YouTube. So on the heels of some of the things you were discussing. So Henry over on YouTube, thank you for joining us tonight. He says a county with a constitutional sheriff is and was a factor in his real estate purchase. So I don't know if you're here in Kootenai County and you're saying that it was a factor for purchasing real estate here recently and you're under the auspices that Bob Norris is a constitutional sheriff. So I think that that is something that you could address right now as to the endorsements that you did get and what made you the constitutional sheriff candidate of choice.
Well, everybody wants to be a constitutional sheriff. They like the buzzword. They say they're pro Second Amendment. They're not going to enforce any red flag laws. And they get it notarized by Wells Fargo like Bob Norris did.
That's right.
And he's not going to make you wear your mask, although he frequently states now that he doesn't have jurisdiction in certain spots. So I don't know where he was going to do this because I didn't know rural Kootenai County was making you wear masks.
It's kind of like indigestion. It comes and goes.
But the fact of the matter is Bob Norris doesn't understand the first thing about the Constitution other than what he learned in the academy. You've listened to the guy for now 5 years. At what point has he ever talked about the founders and the framers and the philosophies and the arguments for and against? Well, he can't because he's never done any studying on his own of how our government was formed and works and why it is such an amazing government that was given to us. So when Sheriff Richard Mack, the original constitutional sheriff, who is now the president of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, when he came to Coeur d'Alene in April of last year, he attempted to meet with Bob Norris. Bob Norris did as he had been doing for several years, shunning Sheriff Mack. Sheriff Mack chose to endorse me, the independent candidate, as the constitutional sheriff candidate of choice, and he stated that Bob Norris was not a constitutional sheriff, and he shared why that was. But that wasn't good enough. Again, all these disingenuous people around here, we're working around a theme here.
Yes. It
which
does
is
all
an extremely overarching, problematic KCRCC as it currently is, held by a few small members, but a lot of useful idiots that are helping to propel it. And you have those people who claim that they're for the Constitution. They claim that they want freedom. They claim that they want liberty. And yet all of the things that they claim they want were right before them. And one after another, they continually flicked it to the wind and said, yeah, but Bob's our friend. Bob's our friend. And what we've seen is the attempted attack and smearing of a man and others in this community, which many of you, part of the KCRCC, are doing. You are unrighteously doing to others around you, thinking that you're somehow vetting people for your church. And this is a problem. But guess what? You created the problem of Dan Wilson. Because had you just let me go through the process, I'd have taken my lumps and said, okay, people didn't choose me. That's the way it goes. Jesse Kelly, similar experience. Dan Bongino, similar experience. But no. When you came out with your Erin Barnards and Stefanie Fetzers and Paul Van Noys and Dave Riley's and all the others that are the so-called conservative gatekeepers of our community, and you came out and you started attacking, that's when you created Dan Wilson. That's when you created liberty without compromise. And yeah, you're right. We didn't win the election, but it doesn't mean the fight's over by a long shot. Because I won't rest until every last one of you guys is exposed to the good things you're doing, bad things you're doing. But I'm not going to compromise the liberty of myself nor of Kootenai County to any one of you tyrants. You self-righteous tyrants that think somehow that you're going to initiate some kind of special kingdom here in Kootenai County. You've lost your way. You've lost your minds.
We're going to attempt to this caller one more time because they did come back. So you're on the air with Dan Wilson. We're going to give it another try. Are you there? I think we have a bad connection. Are you speaking directly into your phone? No headsets, no earbuds? No speakerphone? Can hear you, but it's not great.
I'm on my phone.
Okay, but so I'm gonna have to bail on that one because it's kind of sounding like robotic. Yep. So I don't know if we're getting punked. You have been fodder for conversation on social channels as well. Again, I'm going to say it again, all the way through today, all the way right before we go on the air, and it'll still be there when we're done with the program tonight. Yesterday, there was a conversation circling on social channels that it gets personal. So not only was there an attack from the get-go when you announced your run for sheriff that discredited your experience or where you're truly from, but it became personal down to family matters. So one of those, somebody, and I'm going to mention names, but has been a spearhead of that, but does a fantastic job as coming across as a very, almost a mothering sort of perspective. And she's going to help guide the way for you politically through this process. And that is Stefanie Fetzer.
A professional organizer though.
I believe professional political consultant at this point and an organizer. And some of it, when you follow her story, you'll understand it's not that's necessarily even hidden, but the degree to which the tentacles have gone here in Kootenai County has run very deep, and some of which is for nefarious reasons. And the reason that I will very forthrightly say nefarious reasons is because you don't behave in this way, which will describe and will continue to talk about, but you don't do that when your intentions are good. You don't set out to do that when all you're simply doing is promoting and backing your candidate of choice. It is the tactic of seeking to kill and destroy.
Yeah.
Then at the same time, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to quote scripture, and I'm going to guide the way for the women in my Bible study group. That's what I'm going to do. So how could you even question?
Yeah.
So one of these things, because this, again, came up yesterday, this is why we're still talking about it. And I want you to respond to it in as deeply a way and as personal a way as you possibly can or feel compelled to do.
Yeah.
But the things that came up when somebody who's to your defense, Mark Stewart, has said, look, I've talked to this guy. I find him to be personable. So the kickback from the likes of Erin and Lucky Barnard, Stefanie Fetzer, well, we have an ex-wife and an ex-stepdaughter-in-law and neighbors and an ex-best friend and a brother who would say otherwise. So we know what they're insinuating because they came out to seek, kill, and destroy last year through the campaign with these things that are deeply personal.
With Bob and Bruce chuckling.
And we have, and so to the point that they, I will say, recruited. And again, this is a guy who's not part of the system who says, I'm going to run for office. And this is what they will do. That nothing is beneath them. But they recruited Dan's ex-wife and brought her to the forefront, propped her up, and used her.
Yeah.
And from that vantage point, I feel sorry for a woman who doesn't even understand the capacity to which she's being used because it was opportunistic for her as well.
Was she being used or was she willingly a participant?
Both.
Yeah.
Actually, both. So I want to know some of the history with the accusations that you're an adulterer. Talk to me about.
Well, Erin Barnard, right out of the gates,
Yes.
was continually dropping this on the Telegram page. Ask him about his ex-wife. Ask him about his affair.
Yes.
That was a constant.
Yeah.
Which is defamation.
So it's like
Defamation.
ooh, goody. I got some stuff I know, so I'm not going to drop it right here in the comment section. But why don't you go ahead and ask him about an ex stepdaughter who's really afraid.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go ahead and drop nuggets like that. So what actually went on? What can you share with us to dispel some of this? Because as recently as yesterday, they're still talking about it, which is, we're not trying to beat a dead horse,
right?
But they're still talking about it to seek to kill and destroy.
Yeah, well, it's another chance for us to set the record straight on all of this, since they seem to all be in unison still coming down the runway at us.
So your first marriage.
Yeah. 23 for 1 week, married a woman that was 6 years older. So 28, who had a 8-year-old child.
So you were a 23-year-old.
23-year-old, got married, and to a 20, what was that, 20, I can't do my math, 28, 29, and already had a child. We had our 5 together, and in 2017, an event happened that caused me to file for divorce and to file for a protection order. I was granted that protection order, not only the temporary, but I was granted a full protection order. And as a result, I was given in the state of Washington primary custody of my, at that time, it was 4 minor children still. My 5th and oldest still lived with me, but she was not a minor anymore. And mom was not allowed unsupervised visitation with the kids for 2 years after that divorce started in 2017, the fall of 2017. And when everything was done, when the dissolution was finalized, I still, in the state of Washington, was awarded primary custody of my minor children. And mom was given a typical holiday schedule, and residential time was reduced to 48 hours every other week. So the majority of the time, those children were mine. So, you know, this idea that has been going around that you and I have been together for 10, 15 years, that we had this plan, we hashed it didn't. It was a violent ending by another onto me, and the courts reinforced that, and the courts favored my situation in the liberal state of Washington.
Now, did that happen because you got special treatment? You were propped up. You were law enforcement at that time. Were you somehow able to the system, the judges have better representation, and that is the only way that happened? Because we know that has to be a part of this story for it to even continue to have fuel.
Well, look, it even comes back down to Bruce Mattare and his attempted smears with neighbors and showing a partial part of the story. Now, I want to say that when it came to all of the information that was given to us about Bob Norris and his 4 wives, because he has 3 prior to the one he is with now, we didn't go there. We did not entertain some of the extremely disturbing reports that we were given about.
And from credible sources.
From credible sources, but we didn't do that. Bob Norris couldn't help himself, and they had to bring him through their minions by proxy. By proxy.
But he didn't run a smear campaign because it's done by proxy.
So the thing is this. In the state of Washington, given custody of the minor children, primary custody, still a police officer, if I supposedly had abused my stepdaughter 5 years prior to being sworn as a law enforcement officer, I was investigated. They found nothing there. It was a false claim. We've already covered this in a previous episode that people can find. But I passed polygraphs and extensive background checks. I went through 2 agencies. Look, I don't understand how you can still make the argument that I was able to con each and every process of the system, because what you're saying is, if you can't trust law enforcement background investigations and polygraphs and psychs and all of that, then nobody is safe from any law enforcement officer that has become a law enforcement officer that shouldn't have, because they gamed the system.
Now they've also,
but they'll always give credibility to a person that never demonstrated any kind of background checks, never went through any polygraphs, has never had their firearms taken away because of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they want to still continue to come and smear and say, well, Wilson, set this whole thing up. I mean, it's just, the thing is Erin and Lucky, you guys like to watch soap operas, probably from all your hours of tattooing people and listening to all the sordid things that go on with people in their lives. You just absolutely felt compelled to write your own story based off loosely the character of Dan Wilson and his ex-wife and his new wife.
Now, talk to me about some of the situations, and we'll move on from this. But Lucky Barnard, one of his accusations is we have an ex-wife who has bad things to say about Dan Wilson. Well, I would guess so. Would it not make sense that there's an axe to grind there, even based on what you've already shared? Yeah. But then what about neighbors? Is it just everybody? You can't discredit everybody, Dan. Come on. So that surrounding those situations at that time in a previous marriage, neighbors, let's see, supposedly some other friend,
pastors,
brother, and pastors.
Family members.
So talk to me about those other pieces to the puzzle, because it continues to carry weight.
Well, just so we're clear, I never heard any of those people's accusations firsthand. So what is happening is
that is correct.
It's coming through the grapevine.
Correct.
Ask about these questions, But no, I mean, I have family members like everybody else does with issues. I have a family member that has a previous arrest for substance abuse, that has records for drugs, that is an alcoholic. So obviously, life choices, are they credible?
Good question.
Credible. Neighbors that don't like me. Well, was it the neighbors that were dealing meth and running drugs by carriers up to 30 individuals per day? And I was able to talk enough to my local deputy where I lived and got a CI in there, and then eventually a search warrant where they found meth and distribution and charges on the guy. And I mean, so was that neighbor upset with me? Or are we talking about the pedophile one that lived 2 pastures over that had problems? Or are we talking about the neighbors that were suing me for land that was mine that they wanted for themselves, and that they kept driving over said land, injuring their vehicles, and then attempting to sue me for damages only to lose?
Right.
The same neighbor that, while I'm in a lawsuit on my own private property on acreage, files a police report, wants deputies to respond because I'm wearing a holstered Glock on my hip. All of you Second Amendment people. And then you want to sit there and say, well, we're not okay with Wilson wearing a gun on his own property. I mean, now, what is that?
So I'm going to stop you there because I want to tie that back to the beginning of the program when we said you were invited for your first opportunity to speak in front of a group of fellow Republicans. Mm-hmm. And County Commissioner Bruce Mattare brought out a police
incident report.
Mm-hmm. I want to make sure I'm getting the wording right there. And it was related to this property, this incident with a neighbor that you were in a property dispute with. Yeah. So again, at that time, they were in a
property dispute with me because they're the ones that filed suit.
So briefly tell me that story, because this is an incident report that Bruce Mattare pulled in an attempt to ambush and embarrass you. Yeah. So what was the deal?
So our family had lived on that property for 4 generations. As family members passed away, the other surviving family members sold their property. So we were surrounded. We had this 100-year-old road. It wasn't very wide, where the majority of the neighbors had to pass through my property. One had to make a right-hand turn to access their property several acres down. Which camera am I on?
Oh, I'm on the wide angle. I can,
because I always look at the wrong one.
Yeah, and I'll move it over for you.
What was happening is that there was eventually the desire by the neighbor that had to make the wide turn. They wanted more of our land, and so rather than compensating us for it, they just continually drove over more and more of the land to try to create, this road that they say existed, that they were creating, had always existed. And, so I put up rocks to keep people from driving over my landscape. I mean, they ruined shrubs, they ruined trees, they ruined all sorts of landscaping. Well, they, in one night when they were drunk, drove their van over top of the rocks and ended up damaging their vehicle. So then they filed suit against me for damaging their vehicle and illegally blocking egress. All you deputies that are watching, or officers, you know these land disputes. And so, as I am in the process of being sued by these neighbors claiming that they had a right to my property, they were doing everything they could to cause problems. So I was literally on my land one day. It was raining. I had a Glock holster that was concealed by a jacket, but I was putting up a game camera to watch what they were doing on the road, right? The road in dispute. And the husband, who was in Montana, called deputies from Montana because his wife told him that I was outside wearing a handgun. So a couple, 20, 30 minutes later, I'm sitting on my back porch looking over where my road turns around and turns the corner there and observing, and 2 deputies from Spokane fly up. And I'm like, hey, I wonder why these guys are here. And I went out and talked with them and everything was pleasant. Then immediately they turned and the questioning was, well, we heard that you were wearing a gun on your hip and that people could see that you were having this gun. I'm on my own private property for one thing. And yeah, I had one holstered, but I took it off. And we talked for a little bit longer. And then they said, well, are you armed at all? And I said, well, yeah, I've got a 357 in my back pocket. And then all hell broke loose. They were all upset, all these tactical geniuses. And I'd already identified myself as a Spokane Police Department reserve officer. And they were so offended. Well, the real story is that there was this ongoing feud with Spokane PD and the sheriff's office. And this deputy, an old deputy, was not liked by SPD, and he didn't like SPD himself. And this deputy had not only been sued civilly for civil rights violations and a shady shooting where he killed a guy and he was the only witness, and unlawfully detaining a woman in her own house while she was naked because he got the wrong house, an unlawful arrest. Well, he wrote an incident report where he wanted to smear me. And he wrote a very, very colorful narrative, which there are contradictions in there. Bruce brings that and uses that as the basis for I lied to law enforcement.
Yeah, and in a setting, in a venue where you're a new candidate and you're coming to answer what you would imagine are multiple questions from different people, you don't launch into a 30-minute explanation of like the history, the background, the bone to pick that the neighbors had with you, and how it all got to and then how it ties in with who actually the officers that showed up. I
got called in by my own supervisors at Spokane PD, and I had a conversation with them. Nothing was done. They did not suspend me. There was no discipline. They already knew the reputation of this deputy, and they just said, okay, well, we wanted to hear what your side of the story was, and have a nice day.
Yeah.
But Bruce is taking a memorialized incident report, and he was trying to base it.
And how? Remind me again. How did he obtain?
They admitted it at one of their town halls that they were having on their campaign, that he obtained it from my ex-wife Lisa.
Yes. So he may not, Bob Norris can't have his fingerprints on it. Bruce Mattare doesn't want his fingerprints on it, but he has it in a timely fashion to show up. And
I was able to confirm that because I did a records request on the records request and know what time my ex-wife was able to pull that, that incident.
We're going to continue forward in this.
Oh, by the way.
Yes.
We want to talk about the dysfunction because shortly thereafter, the neighbors around that corner end up getting arrested because he got mad one day and started firing off his handgun towards our house.
Yeah.
He was charged with 5 counts of reckless endangerment. So there's always multiple sides to the story, folks. But Bruce Mattare, the great change agent that he is, and Bob Norris, who can't figure any of this stuff out. He uses he uses Bruce because he's just not smart enough. He's going to capitalize on every one of these stories in order to try to paint a picture of Dan Wilson is unfit for office.
So, that then comes back to Erin and Lucky Barnard still using this to fuel some kind of fire to seek, kill, and destroy Dan Wilson. Well, there's neighbors who are afraid of him. Well, Dan has just now painted a picture of who these people in fact were.
Who got paid in the lawsuit when it was settled? It wasn't me. I didn't do any payout. And in fact, they were very upset when they finally figured out
who got paid.
Yeah, I got paid.
There you go. I want to clarify. Yeah. And these are people that they're using these as witnesses and to propel this story about Wilson, bad guy, Wilson, bad guy. Well, these are the caliber of people that they're bringing to the forefront. Yeah. We're going to continue on in this because we've got a couple more items that we have just felt laid on our heart and compelled to talk about today. So I know we're going a bit over, but just as a breather here, I want to remind you that you can enter to win this premium Liberty Without Compromise embroidered snapback trucker hat. That is on our website, libertywithoutcompromise.com. There's a button right there on the homepage. You cannot currently purchase this in our online store. So that is the only way to have a chance to get your hands on that hat. Now, the church.
Yeah.
This is a touchy subject. So early on, this came early on too.
And they're still saying it. And
they still are. Again, that's why it kind of been like the common thread today is we're not beating a dead horse because the pony's still like running and kicking, and that's why we're talking about it. But you came out on a podcast that was recorded. I mean, at this point, I want to say several years ago, but a couple of years ago, prior to your campaign, we co-hosted a podcast called The Unspoken. And you shared a story that something happened to you that you experienced that day. And that day that we sat down to record our podcast, you were talking about the events of that day. And this was one of those stories that came out.
Yeah.
So, in brief, why don't you tell us what that was? Because you had some colorful language.
My offices used to be in the Spokane Valley. And so I would drive from North Idaho into the Spokane Valley and I would get coffee. And I'm sitting in a local coffee shop, a national brand coffee shop. And as I was sitting there writing, I saw a group of what I later found out were pastors from a church just down the road from this coffee shop. And they were down there talking business. And I was describing them in my podcast, typical skinny jeans, the well-kempt beards, the oversized glasses, the sweaters,
really clean,
all that.
Really clean sneakers.
And I was describing it because that's what it is. You describe people, you're telling a story. And I was articulating the fact that they were talking so loud in their Christianese and all their, church talk. Everybody inside the entire coffee shop could hear what they were saying. And after they were done, patting each other on the back and all of that, they got down to business. They brought in another man that was a candidate for the sole purpose of infiltrating all of their numerous small groups with the intent of convincing the small groups to buy in to a new church building campaign that they had found previously when they attempted to do it. The congregation wasn't as willing to be a part of this very large campus. And so I was explaining this, and I have a problem when you bring somebody in to manipulate your church and when you're using church as a business. And so I described all that. And then we have a couple hours before I went to the North Idaho Freedom Fighters Town Hall, which was open to all candidates.
Yeah, it had just come out on social media. There was a gal by the name of Melanie Herman who made a point. Again, we didn't seek her out. We
never met her in my life.
Don't know who she is, but she made a point of navigating her way to the Idaho Sheriff Facebook page, and on unrelated posts, just started like copy and paste, dropping comments into the comment section that you had disparaged her church and her pastor, and how dare you, and what a fool you are for just turning off and turning your back and offending 13,000 members of my church. These are amazing people. My pastor's amazing. I stand behind. How dare this guy do that? Now, I was able to give you a heads up, say, look, you're going into this. What we were hoping, again, would be a place at the North Idaho Freedom Fighter Town Hall where you could share your ideas, your vision, your qualifications, your experience. And I said, I'm using this as a tip that this is most likely it's too timely. This is most likely gonna come up at that town hall tonight and put you once again in defensive mode.
And you had Ed Baharana there that was the MC.
And sure enough, out of a stack of cards of questions for the sheriff, that was one that was chosen by Ed Baharana. And
Eric Zimmerman and Rene that were also part of that were in attendance. And he wanted to make certain that we left out part of the question about my disparaging comments on the people that went to his church and that they were skinny boys, soy boys, wearing skinny jeans, and prostitutes. I mean, he wanted to make certain that the word prostitute.
And he said prostitute when you referred to prostituting the church. So you've given us a little bit of insight as to what you said on that podcast. Talk to me about that night when you were presenting at the North Idaho Freedom Fighter Town Hall, what your defense was in response to that night. And if now through today, if that has changed or if you hold that solid, and what would your response or invitation be to Melanie Herman or Rene or Eric Zimmerman?
Well, I would say, first of all, no, I have not changed my position. And it is simply this. Number one, if you are going to market Jesus Christ, and this is somebody that is a professing follower of Jesus Christ, he is my Lord and Savior, My loyalties are to him first, before my country. And I'm going to tell you that, yeah, I absolutely oppose any church, any organization that calls themselves a church that would, whether the people knew it or not, scheming in the backside to make their church a business and to figure out how they can manipulate the people. And we're not going to get into a long theological dialogue tonight, but that's it. And again, I'm going to ask this question. Melanie Herman, you've been given numerous opportunities to come and have a conversation with me. And number one, prove that I was talking about your church, because you've never have. And you are dead wrong. You are absolutely dead wrong. I wasn't talking about your church. I don't care if your husband was a sit-in host for Rush Limbaugh. Couldn't care less. Doesn't matter to me. You ran your mouth. You're the one that continually said the things that I said and framed them like somehow I'm a lunatic. Then let's sit down with our Bibles. I'll use my ESV. You can use your King James or NIV, whatever translation you want. And you sit down and you tell me, based on that podcast and what I said, where in scripture I'm wrong on anything that I said. I've given you ample time. What I'm saying is you are deliberately leading people astray by your false argument. But actually, maybe you don't know the Lord and Savior. It is possible. It's possible that you're just there because you know the buzzwords and you are there to be part of a social club. And you know what? That's okay. But let me ask you something, Melanie. If your church, your mega church, was so effective, along with all the other hundreds of churches, evangelical and whatever flavor they are so effective. You named 12,000 plus people, I believe. Why hasn't Kootenai County changed? You show me in scripture where it's the biblical model for pastors to manipulate their congregation. You're not going to find it. So once again, crickets, but they'll continue the lies. You folks now know what the truth is.
We want to know if somebody, are you really just a guy that one day decided I'm going to run for office without professional political experience? Were you just a guy that independently, as a Republican, decided to do that? Or do you have the backing of someone or some organization? I think it's difficult for people to fathom that you don't, because this is the entire way this system operates.
Yeah.
Because everybody else does.
Yeah.
You don't make it. You don't get elected. You don't get the funding. If you don't have the approval by the KCRCC and their minions, you're falling flat. You're not going to win that campaign. Was there somebody else backing you when really proving them wrong? You did run a national level campaign. You did create your own media distribution channel. You did become an investigative researcher, pulling records, providing the proof, guest on national level podcasts. So we're not sitting here again crying in our, whatever that expression is.
Crying in our beer.
Crying in my Wheaties, crying in my, whatever it is. We're not crying over it. If we even just believe the numbers that are there, that 20,000 people in this county, you go from nobody knows who this guy is to 20,000 people in this county were inspired by your message. And that was the result of a national level campaign. And you will never convince me otherwise. Mm-hmm. Was there somebody backing you on that? Were you aligning yourself with somebody and claiming to just not be influenced?
You.
Well, I didn't expect that answer. That was not the answer I expected.
You were the one. Because we had many conversations about it. And I could not stand the incompetency of Bob Norris. That still continues to this day. Mm-hmm. 5 years, we have nothing good to show out of the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office other than raises for the deputies.
Yeah.
And it may be hard for people who come from other areas of the country or who have never truly stood on their own. We are losing what I call the greatest generation mindset. It's all but lost, which is men had codes and creeds that they live by. and could stand on their own. And I have my dad to thank for instilling in me a code as young as 4 years old and challenging me on that throughout the years. But I saw something that I knew was wrong. I did not realize how bad it was, but my spirit knew. And in time, it was revealed. It is revealed how corrupt the current leadership of the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee, in my belief, is. How insane you are. How out of touch. Listening to all of your tweets and your virtue signaling. You claim that you are conservative. You claim that you love liberty, and yet you try to force down your values on people by force on a continual basis, and you choose kingmakers. Tell me, Brent, why do you associate with Agent Tiki, the one that was involved with the Charlottesville Tiki March, the one that had to flee Pennsylvania, the one that came up here and then attempted to run as a disguised Democrat, and then eventually was involved with the Pizzagate down there with Luna and Moon? I mean, you want to talk about, you want people held accountable for illegal actions? I'm pretty certain there was a crime committed there when you falsely, this individual, Agent Tiki, with Erin Barnard, because we finally found that out, conspired together to create this false event at Tom Luna, who was running for state chairman of the GOP against Dorothy Moon, as I recall, inviting homeless people to a pizza feed at one of his events. You're going to tell me there wasn't a crime committed there? For all of you special people that say, hey, you know, this new law, it doesn't have any penalties, but by God, if you go to chapter 37 that was written in 1889 and you go down and squint and wink 3 times, you can find a way to arrest somebody. Well, if we're going to take that kind of approach, I'm pretty positive that there should have been charges filed against Erin and Tiki. And let's have another conversation, Stefanie Fetzer. For whatever, I have no idea. I've never met you in my life, but I do not understand, unless it was the power player pastor, whoever put into your idea that I'm an anti-Semite. How dare you? I was running for a county office where my job as sheriff would be to protect everybody in the county's rights, regardless of what their background, whatever their ethnicity is. You attempted to smear me. How do you justify being part of this KCRCC when you have Agent Tiki on one side in his podcast where he absolutely says vile things and hateful things towards somebody of another race? His perfect right to do so. Just so we're clear. 100% his right and their right to say whatever they want. How dare you sit there? So on one hand, I'm a groiper, which groiper means that I'm an anti-Semite, and then apparently I'm pro-Israel because I had somebody that was draped in an Israeli flag that was a supporter of mine. You guys are insane. How in the hell is somebody at a local level supposed to make some kind of a judgment as to whether or not the nation of Israel is good or bad? Or the people that are there are good or bad? You can do the same thing from outside of the United States looking in. The United States does a lot of bad things. It does a lot of good things. It doesn't mean that everybody inside the U.S. is a criminal or bad. And yet for some reason, you decided to bring that fight to me. As if somehow I create policy on a national level. No, you're all looking for your soundbite. Let me make it very perfectly clear. I support everybody and their rights to life, liberty, and property as defined in the Bill of Rights. I couldn't care less when it comes to national politics because, frankly, we all know we've been lied to so long, I don't even know what the real narrative is, but I refuse to hate a nation or a people just because of where they come from. I hate actions by people, and I don't give a rubber stamp of approval just because somebody's called God's chosen people, but I also don't believe that they're the root of every evil in our world. So, Stefanie, since you wanted to know this answer and you are online again attempting to smear me along with the pastor that you work with, the one that flies the Israeli flag over and over and over again, let me be perfectly clear. I'm for everybody when it comes to county politics. This is part of this lie. And Brent Reagan has surrounded himself with Agent Tiki and with the non-groypers, because that's their terminology. And you guys are all insane. You're all struggling for control to prove who's the most pure, but you're fighting inside with your own ideology. And then you want to pick on Dan Wilson because what? Inexperienced. And yet you voted for Trump. You championed Dan Bongino, who is only a Secret Service agent and only a New York Police Department officer. Mm-hmm. But he just got promoted to be deputy director of the FBI. And you guys are all, this is great. You hypocrites. You want to still run your mouths online and take out a local guy because you have hero worship at a national level. You can't see your own ass in front of you, what's going on. And you're not going to silence me. And I want to encourage, lastly, those of you who I've become acquainted with over the past several months, did not know you before the election, didn't know you during the campaign, but I've heard lots of bad things about you all. But I've never personally heard you say in your own words what others have said. And I guarantee you that I will give everybody an equal opportunity to tell me who they are and have a conversation. And I can guarantee you there will be things that we will align on because we are Americans and we are citizens here in Kootenai County. And I guarantee there will be things that will be absolutely non-negotiables. And I said this to the Democrats when I met with the Democrat Central Committee during the campaign. I said, I am not going to change my conservative worldview, but I will protect your rights to life, liberty, and property. And here are the things that we can agree on. Because what the KCRCC is doing right now in this state, they are going to destroy this republic. They are going to smash it into a million pieces if you keep going the way you're going with this purity test, because eventually the other side's going to take over. And like we see at a national level, it's going to get brutal. If we start allowing people to go through all sorts of gymnastics to figure out how to take it to the lawbreaker that's flying a pride flag, they're going to do the same thing to you guys the next time around. So my encouragement is this. If you're a young man or a woman, and I consider myself a young man, get involved. You don't have to be backed by anybody. You just have to have a stern look on the way things are. You have to have a stiff upper lip. You have to have a code. You have to have a creed. You have to know what you believe in. And if you believe in something strong enough and you know that you're in the right, you keep going and you don't let anybody stop you.
One last thing. I know we're going over, but I want to push through on this. So having just said that, are you going to talk to who you want to talk to? Does it mean that they're funding you? You're aligned with them? Yeah. You're a rhino? You're a Democrat? Are you going to keep talking to whoever you want to talk to?
Look, I have been accused of being a whack job because I'm friends with Casey Whalen. I've been accused of being a whack job because I'm a friend with Quincy Franklin, the BC preacher. I've been accused of being a liberal because I've had conversations with Dan Gookin and with Mark Stewart and others. And let me be very clear. There isn't a damn one of you out there that's going to tell me who I will and will not talk to or who I will or will not associate with, because you know what? I'm strong enough in my belief system that I can have conversations with people and I can disagree respectfully. And you know what? Maybe I will compel them to my argument. There isn't anybody out there in this county right now, well, maybe a few exceptions, who I would not sit down with and have a conversation with. And I thought that that's what a sheriff does. Mm-hmm. I thought a sheriff runs with the idea that they represent all people, not just the Republican overlords. Lots to say. We didn't get through a lot of what I really wanted to say, but this has been a long time in coming.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely has. I want to remind you that anything, any proof or why are words,
Well,
it gets
anything
to
that we
after
talked
8
about
o'clock at night.
tonight that we
Yes.
want to,
If we
people want to
have video clips, screenshots,
Examples
those
of-
sorts of things, give me a couple of days because we will produce those. They'll be available on our website at libertywithoutcompromise.com, and they will be complimentary to this program. I also do always go back into YouTube and create chapters. So if there's something that you've heard in a specific segment, you'll be able to easily find those timestamps and share from those links just those specific segments there on YouTube. So be sure, I'm going to prompt you then also to be sure to subscribe to that YouTube channel because there are great resources available there.
Usually we leave you with a quote by a founder. But tonight, specifically because we've been talking about things related to the country and our faith and other people's faith, and those that are trying desperately to make our government their church. I want to leave you with this quote by Francis Schaeffer, Christian philosopher, Presbyterian minister, I believe from the 70s. He wrote a book called How Then Shall We Live? And he really prophesied predicted what was going to happen about the time we find ourselves now. We are a post-Christian nation. We'll talk about that a little more for those of you that don't understand, but here is what Francis Schaeffer has to say. This is specifically to my friends who are part of the church. There is no New Testament basis for a linking of church and state until Christ the King returns. The whole Constantine mentality from the 4th century up to our day was a mistake. Constantine, as the Roman emperor in 313, ended the persecution of Christians. Unfortunately, the support he gave to the church led by 381 to the enforcing of Christianity by Theodosius I as the official state religion. Making Christianity the official state religion opened the way for confusion up till our own day. There have been times of very good government when this interrelationship of church and state has been present, but through the centuries, it has caused great confusion between loyalty to the state and loyalty to Christ, between patriotism and being a Christian. We must not confuse the kingdom of God with our country. To say it another way, we should not wrap our Christianity in our national flag. And this is part of the message that I've been saying for a long time. You have to face the fact that the churches have allowed, through their impotency, to neuter American men. We are a post-Christian nation because the church has been asleep at the wheel. They're more interested in coming up with rules and legalism and making men who are made in the image of God, not men, to fit to their criteria. They have lost a cultural war. And we are seeing the results of 2 generations at minimum of this behavior from the church. You want to change your government, you must change your culture first. If you don't change your culture, then anything you try to do legislatively is tyranny. And with that, I want to remind you all to be strong and courageous. Never, ever let others discourage you from doing what you know to be right. If you're a believer, trust the Spirit. The Spirit gives you discernment. Do good to those in your community. Fight for what you know is worth fighting for. Stand, make a difference. God bless you all. I'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us tonight on this rapid fire episode of Liberty Without Compromise. Visit our website to watch past episodes and view exclusive reports. Also, get those resources that we'll have available from tonight's program, all right there on our website. For our podcast, you can listen and subscribe wherever you get your shows. A reminder, you want to try these tasty treats. The Midday Squares cookie dough is our favorite, but they got like 6 different flavors: brownie, peanut butter, all that good stuff.
I need that 15% off after my tax burden yesterday.
Yes. Save that 15%. Click on the link in the comment section. That also helps support our program, and you get something delicious out of it. Also, remember to enter to win this exclusive Liberty Without Compromise snapback trucker hat right there on the website. The link is on the homepage, libertywithoutcompromise.com. And I think with that, we're looking forward to seeing you guys next week.